Turnout for this is absolutely amazing. So yes, this is going to be a 2-hour open forum. So I will be here taking questions from everyone. Please don't shout at me. Just raise your hand and I'll answer you. So I wanted to just point out that this is a press junket about AI and entertainment, because that's what our panel is on tomorrow. Obviously, strike is foremost in all of our brains right now. So obviously the strike is paramount in our minds right now, but I would say this is not a panel about the strike. Obviously, AI is an important part of what we are striking over at SAG-AFRA and the WGA. So if you have specific questions about that, wonderful, but please do not just ask generic questions about the strike. That's all I ask. Any questions before we get started? Okay. So I'm just going to go down the line, let everybody introduce themselves if you don't already know who they are. So starting right here.
Hi everybody, my name is Zeke Alton. I am an actor, do a lot of video game work in video games like the Callisto Protocol, Call of Duty, and Ratchet and Clank. I am also a former military acquisition officer and test pilot. I'm a retired commander, so I did a lot of contract and negotiating work for the military. I am a member of the negotiating committee for the TV theatrical contract for SAG-AFRA, and also a member of the negotiating committee for the interactive or video game contract.
Thanks, Zeke. Hi, everybody. My name is Duncan Crabtree-Ireland. I am the National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator for SAG-AFRA, and that means I'm not an actor. I'm the least talented person on this panel. But it is my job to look out for the interests of actors in all areas that SAG-AFRA covers, including video games, as well, of course, as TV theatrical, and very proud to have that responsibility. I'll use a slight moment of my introduction to just say, for those who might not be familiar with what SAG-AFRA is, SAG-AFRA is the union that represents really everyone who works in front of a camera or behind a microphone, including all types of acting, including in video games and film, television, and media, and many other facets as well. We have about 160,000 members around the world, and as Linsay said, you might have heard that we're on strike right now in the film, television, and streaming contracts. It's not the focus of this panel, but I just acknowledge that and acknowledge our many members who, at this very moment, are out on picket lines around the country. Thanks.
Cool. Hello, my name is Tim Friedlander. I'm a voice actor. I'm in Ace Combat 7, as well as currently Ares in Record of Ragnarok on Netflix. I am the president and co-founder of the National Association of Voice Actors, along with Karen Gilfrey back there, who's our co-founder and vice president. And we are an association that's working to advocate on behalf of voice actors within the larger entertainment industry. And also am a SAG-AFRA member myself as well.
Hi, my name is Burch. I am a SAG and WGA member, and I work the TV theatrical and the interactive contract. I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Cissy Jones. I'm also a voice actor in video games and animation, commercials, all the things. I'm a board member at NAVA, and I'm really excited to be here talking with all of you today. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, let's open it up to you guys. Just raise your hand. Yes, here.
Can all of you talk about some of the abuses that have gone on in the voiceover world when it comes to AI and what you're seeking to protect in this new negotiation?
That's a very large question. I can talk to some of that, and then I think Zeke can add, and Tim, obviously Ashley as well. So one of the things that we've been seeing that is disconcerting but very public is the use of fan mods. Let me first say, most importantly, we love our fans. We would not be here if it were not for the fandoms. We are grateful every single day for the people that like our work. But there is a tendency, or I guess what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, a community where people will take the voices that are publicly available, rip them, create their own AI versions of them, and have them say whatever they want. In some instances, it can be cheeky. In some instances, it can be very hurtful. There are a lot of things that are defamatory, NSFW, and you know, as someone who makes my living with this little 2-inch spot on my face, it's incredibly harmful. If I don't have the ability to control what my voice says, and especially if people can't tell whether it's fake or not, it has the potential to do massive harm to me, financially, personally. Also, I have children. There are things I don't want my voice to say and have my children hear it and question if that is something that I have actually said. I understand the fun of it. I understand why people think it's interesting. I really do, but I would ask with my entire soul that they put themselves in our shoes and look at something that they love wholly. We don't do this job because we get rich. We do this job because we love it. I would ask that people think about something that they love having taken without their consent and used in ways that they do not approve of, and how harmful that can be.
I can speak a little bit to some of the most specific instances that we've seen. One of the original ones was the Bev Standing and TikTok lawsuit, which happened a couple years ago. She settled out of court with them. Currently, what we're seeing, what we've seen at NAVA is 3 very specific instances of voice actors who have had their voices taken, used without their permission in other projects. One particular was taken from one game and used in another game, unrelated to the game they originally had signed for. One actor found their voice taken and used in a promo that they never did. And another one worked for a company for 3 years, and for the 4th year, the company did not rehire them because they said, we have 3 years of your voice. We're just going to create an AI synthetic voice out of what you already have. As far as for those actors, the contracts they had did not protect them in this case, and trying to find some aspect to put into these contracts to allow very specifically consent control and compensation for the voice actors when it comes to the use of AI and synthetic voices.
Zeke, did you have something to add to that? I
Sure.
see you furiously taking notes.
Let's be clear, Pandora's box is open, and we're not against the use of artificial intelligence systems, if you want to call them that. They're not artificial intelligence systems. They are focused algorithms that do really, really good things. So in broad speaking, if you're not familiar, the concepts of narrow AI, general AI, and super AI, we're not talking about general or super. We're not talking about Terminator 2, and that conversation is out there. That's not the conversation we're having. We're talking about narrow AI systems, systems that do a specific task better than a human can. For example, something that needs to read the New York Times as it is printed every day in the morning in every language for people across the world. Humans can't do that. But that's a really good use of the technology. We're not against that. We recognize that. What we're interested in is consent and compensation of the people that are being used. So if you're going to replicate me or any other performer, we should consent to that, and then we should be compensated for the use of what makes us money. Furthermore, there is the concept of these large algorithmic machines that generate things. Well, they don't generate anything new. They scour the landscape of the internet and take things and then mix them up in a jumble and run the algorithm over them and spit something else out. That machine, there needs to be some transparency in the world of what it's taking up, because it just doesn't affect us as actors or voice actors or on-camera actors. It affects the entire labor force, CPAs, paralegals, radiology technicians. All right, if we can't see into the machine, then we have no idea whose work and whose life's work and training is being taken for free without consent and compensation and turned into something that makes money for a billionaire sitting somewhere at a retreat. So that's why this is important to us.
Linsay, can I add just a word
Yeah,
to that? What Zeke said is so right, and I just want to say, consent really has to mean informed consent, because one of the things that's so typical in this industry, large industry, video games, film, television, all of it, is this idea that you can sort of lawyer things in a way where consent is buried in some sentence in the middle of a 12-page contract, and it doesn't really mean anything. And so when we're fighting for consent, we're fighting for informed consent, meaning that the performer needs to understand exactly what's going to be done with any kind of digital replica of their voice or their face or their body or whatever. It has to be real consent. It can't be this sort of sham of consent that's been sort of embedded into the industry. And I think the actors that you see on this panel are at the forefront of this, because the truth is that this for technical reasons, this is happening more quickly with voice acting than it is in any other field. And so it is absolutely essential that people really hear what the folks on this panel are saying about the necessity to have this kind of consent, informed consent, fair compensation, etc. I think that no one should think that there's any less resolve amongst the voice actor community, the video game actor community, than there is in the actor community in film, television, streaming, or anywhere else. Our members, our actors doing all of this type of work are equally concerned about the impact of these technologies on their work lives, and they are standing just as strong.
And Ashley, you're also here as a SAG-AFRA member, but also a WGA member. So how is that going to impact your work as a writer?
AI and the development of AI, I think, is an existential threat in general, especially to, I would say, entry-level creatives. And that, to me, is such a huge part of this fight. It is about protecting people that are new to the industries that they're trying to enter, that don't have the support or clout to be able to defend themselves when there are predatory contracts. And that's a big thing across, I would say, all of the unions right now and all of the negotiations, is that we're trying to protect the people that are at these lower levels that are trying to rise up in their career, because especially when it comes to voiceover, a lot of these roles that you're seeing that people would like to replace AI with are entry level. I mean, some of our most beloved actors in this field have come up doing that kind of work. And so when the right for fledgling actors to be able to engage with this kind of work isn't protected, and when companies are allowed to be predatory to those people, and that they don't have the sort of guidance or the sort of knowledge or the protection from a legal standpoint to have their work protected, then their career could be over before it even begins. And it's the same thing for writers, like Zeke said, these are tools. They're very effective tools when in the hands of creatives. And it's the exact same thing for writers. It breaks my heart to talk to WGA members who are staff writers that cannot afford to make rent, and they're working on these massive TV shows. And that producers have no empathy in terms of the threat that AI has to their profession. So it's existential across the entire board, and I think in particular to the most vulnerable members of our unions.
Another question, yes, here.
Just so that everyone's on the same page, this is kind of a strike adjacent question, but what was the proposal that SAG made towards protections against AI in the recent proposal, if that's okay to disclose, so just so everyone knows?
Sure, let me just say that for our negotiations on the interactive agreement, which is the video games agreement, are still ongoing, and we don't talk about the details of proposals in ongoing negotiations. As you know, we released details on our proposals in the film, television, and streaming negotiations after we went on strike in those contracts. And so what I can say is that the themes of our interest are the same regardless of the contract, right? Those have already been mentioned: informed consent, fair compensation, also appropriate limitations on the use of generative AI tools and training of those generative AI models using the work of our members, and also limitations on the use of completely synthesized voices and performances. And by that I mean, when I say synthesized, what I'm referring to is performances that are created entirely from amalgamations of other people's voices or faces, etc., so that you can't visually or auditorily recognize them, but they are in fact amalgamated in that way. And so we don't want to see human artistry replaced by that type of synthetic creation. And so those are sort of the four key points of or themes of our proposal in the film, television, and streaming contract. And I think people can expect that those are the protections and issues that our members are committed to across all of our contracts, and that's what we will be fighting for, to make sure that AI doesn't overtake the human element of creativity.
Over here, yeah.
Hi, thanks. Sales Tilly from Lucy Magazine. I totally understand the 4 key points. I have a question regarding the localization process, because everybody is really defending the main original voice and the main creative work. But in the globalization principle right now, localization is really targeted by the AI. Is that something that you are working on, or not?
Well, if that strikes it to me, I would just say we are working on it in the sense that if localization is going to be done using the voice of the original performer using AI tools and technologies, that also requires informed consent and fair compensation. And so I expect that there will be more of that because technology is going to make that more feasible. But I think it's also important that since people make a living doing that work now, that it is important that if that is to be done, that the fair compensation structure is maintained so there's not an economic incentive for companies to use that methodology instead of using voice performers to do that work. We have at least one example of a company that that's using AI tools to do localization services who've committed to using voice actors to do that work rather than using synthesized voices. And so that's something that we definitely, I'm sure everybody on this panel wants to encourage that as a responsible use of artificial intelligence technology.
Yeah, because I know a lot of us up here do dubbing work. We do localized video games. Tim, I think you can probably talk to this.
Yeah, I can speak to that a bit. NAV is also one of the founding members of United Voice Artists, which is an 18-nation, 32 association coalition, primarily based in the UK. We have Les Voix, the France, Spain, Germany, and they're concerned because their voice actors are celebrities in those countries the same way that they are here, and which was very interesting. Actually, to this note, I received a message from the German coalition saying that their actress Dagmar Dempe just won a Lifetime Achievement Award for her work as the voice of Meryl Streep. And so this, when it's a global threat, it's outside of just the United States, and it affects all the artists who are working in the voiceover industry globally. And so we're working with that right now to help get protections in the EU AI Act, very specifically for voice. We're working with FIA to help get that in place. We're also working to advocate for all the associations around the world. We're working very closely with Nigeria and Kenya with their dubbing actors who are there. Because what happens, voiceover is a global industry. Voiceover, we do not work the same way that on-screen actors work. Any given day, I can be working with a producer in New York, the director in Canada, and the company in Sweden. And so whose laws do we fall under? Whose protections do we have? And how can we help all of those people in those various different countries be safe and safeguard their ability to keep working? So it is global, and dubbing is gigantic. Dubbing is huge in all these other countries. These celebrities, these voice actors are celebrities the same way that we view the celebrities in the United States, and it's important to protect all of them.
Yeah.
Can I add to that one? You're going to hear us talk a lot about the humanity in art. And there is a lot to be said for adaptation, not just translation. Because a show that is filmed in Korea or Russia or Brazil, there is slang, there are colloquialisms, there are cultural references that don't come across in a direct translation. And without a creative in the middle, trying to do an Italian sitcom dubbed into English, you're not going to get any of the jokes. They just won't come across. So there's always going to be a space for creatives in there. It has to be, or else no one's going to consume that media because it's going to suck.
Yes, back there, I thought you were
So I had a question about informed consent. For a career that is so heavily reliant on publicity via social media, how do you handle the concerns of those companies who essentially in their terms of use bury we can do whatever we want with whatever you post forever and ever? And so how is that kind of working, and what are your concerns with that for up and coming artists and even established artists?
Well, I think probably all of us can agree that those terms are all overreaching, and some of that can be addressed through collective bargaining. Some of that has to be addressed through public policy and other methods. I think anyone who's watched Jonah's Awful, the first episode of the current Black Mirror season on Netflix, can imagine a world that not too far off from where we are today, where that kind of abuse affects everyone. And I think that's one of the reasons why what people are saying here really resonates with the public so much, because I think everyone is concerned about having having elements of their personal life or their persona, maybe their face taken and used without real informed consent. So I personally think, I think institutionally we favor the idea of our culture moving more towards a model of informed consent where people actually know what it is they are agreeing to when they agree to something, and not having huge corporations take advantage of you with these take it or leave it contracts with important terms buried in the middle of it. People think that only happens in an online click wrap environment, but you know that happens in Hollywood every single day with personal service agreements that are chock full of boilerplate provisions that the actual person doesn't know what they are or what they mean, and that's really not right.
Zeke, did you have anything to add? Okay, next question. Yeah, right there.
So that's what informed consent is not, is these boilerplate across the board. What does informed consent look like? Is it just very, very narrow?
Well, it could be narrow, or it could just be fully explained. I mean, really what it means is fully explained. So, for example, the previous questioner mentioned the idea of promotional activities. So it's understood when an actor, a voice actor or any type of actor agrees to work on a project that there are certain promotional activities that are going to be part of that. Those aren't necessarily listed out in terms of dates, times, or exact platforms that that's going to be. But there is a understanding of what the scope and nature of that, or there should be an understanding of what the scope and nature of that promotional activity is. And same thing, you know, if you're going to create a digital replica of a performer to, for the purpose of, say, reducing vocal stress, let's say there's going to be some specific vocalizations that are needed, and a digital replica of the performer's voice could be used to help that. That could be informed, they could be discussed, they could know exactly that's what's going to be done with that digital replica, and that's great. What's not great is a line that says, we're going to create a digital replica of your voice, and we have the right to use it in perpetuity throughout the universe for any purpose we desire, period. That's not informed consent because it doesn't tell you anything about what they're going to do with it. And so really it's fundamentally about, you can't consent to something meaningfully if you don't even know what it is or what it's going to be. So it's a fair description of that intended use.
I would also like to say that some of the contracts, in addition to what Duncan just said, will also say any technology existing now or in the future.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's a new provision.
Yeah, they're in the back.
Can I just get clarification on the position of voice actors with regards to the ongoing strike? Obviously, we have voice actors talking at panels here. I know you mentioned it's a separate contract. Is there a timeline where they could become part of the strike? Just what is this overall situation?
Well, those of us who are SAG-AFRA members are part of the strike. We are, if we're working under those contracts or we're working on those contracts, we are not currently working under those contracts, so we are supporting the strike actively. Our voice actors are members of SAG-AFRA and are out on the picket line, and we are here under the same rules and terms as everybody else in the strike.
Well, Zeke, you can also, there is some voiceover work that is part of the TV theatrical contract that is being struck right now. You might want to elaborate on that, Zeke.
SAG-AFRA has, I don't know what the number of contracts is. It's a lot. It's in the hundreds. We're striking one of them. It happens to be the largest one. So we're not currently striking interactive, so voice actors can work in games. But we have to understand that what we do here echoes through eternity. Is what happens in this strike is going to impact not only the acting profession, but every profession. But specific to the acting profession, an actor is an actor is an actor. So if we are not protected at the end of this strike in this contract, we're not protected in any contract. And we can watch this all go away.
And right now, voiceover actors who work in looping and ADR, that is currently struck. So any of those voices that add to background actors, trailers are struck, and feature film animation. So we as voice actors are being impacted right now with this current contract. Yes, right there.
For those people who are saying, and it's a minority of people, I think, but for those who are saying, well, this is the future. AI is the future. We have to accept it. It's like fighting the internet or a phone where you can look up all information. What is your response to those people who are like, listen, this is the future. We have to accept it. What is your response to those people?
I would say it's not an inevitability. It is the future. And currently right now we feel like we don't have a voice in that future development. And that's what we want. We want to be a part of this as it goes forward. So as Zeke said, there are multiple things that could potentially be used for great things with this. So why use it to replace humans when we can use it to help us? And that's what we want to be a part of this conversation for.
Yeah, Cissy, I think you had something to add to that.
Sure. I am currently working with a company that approached me that is specifically focused on the most important issues we face as voice actors, mostly authentic and ethical. And I do mean ethical, not just saying ethical, but being ethical in our use of AI with an actor. It's an actor-first approach, but still, we're still in stealth mode. There's more to come very soon, but we have to put some finishing touches on some of the more important pieces. But we are working on something that will be an ethical use of all of this.
Zeke, did you have anything to add to that?
It's going to change the world, right? I mean, we hear that a lot. We hear, NFTs are going to change the world. Whatever is the newest thing, right? But I think we all agree on this side of the table that this is one of them things. So when you look at things like the assembly line that changed the world, the internet that changed the world, that can go one way or the other. It can be a tool to allow the population to rise, or it can be a tool in the hands of the masters to bring the wealth to a single point in the 1%. And again, this is a labor force argument. There are no 1%ers in this room.
And Ashley, yeah, I was going to say you have something to add to that.
I would also say, too, that I think it's a mistake to assume also that with the integration of AI that the consumer will just win, that everything is just better if we allow AI to lead the way. I don't know if you've seen any AI-generated shows or scripts or anything. Right? There is a reason that humans make art. And I think, again, as Zeke said, it's a tool, and I don't think any of us are against adapting a new technology as a tool, but it should be used in an integrative way that supports the artists that are creating this media for everyone to consume. And I just can't imagine a future in which people are going to prefer media that has no human stamp on it. So I think it's just about thinking of it in terms of how can we integrate this into the human experience rather than letting it take over. Right there, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry, before we go on, if I may, Linsay, I just want to say, what these people on this panel are doing is really important. And to your question specifically about the inevitability of AI, the inevitability of it, people have to speak up. People have to speak out. I think we've gotten to a point in this country, and the labor movement's been a big part of it, saying people are not just going to accept whatever big corporations want to do anymore, and it's not okay that AI is implemented by, AI doesn't implement itself, AI is implemented by the voluntary decisions and choices of these big corporations. And people need to hold them accountable. These members and many others, these actors and many others are helping to do that, are helping to hold these big companies accountable. And we don't accept the premise that we just have to do whatever they say. AI can be implemented in a human-centered way. AI can be implemented in a way that uplifts people instead of breaking them down. And I really feel like we all, actors and actually the entire society, ought to be saying, we demand that. It is not okay for these companies to just implement this however they want. This is about all of us, and we are going to say no to abusive implementations of AI.
Yeah, right there.
Hi, I'm sort of speaking to the entry level. One of the things that I've noticed very often is AI in terms of replicating different cultural groups or different ethnicities, and that's sort of becoming, like, it might be fun to hear SpongeBob sing a gospel song, but like the bigger threat of like maybe less black voice actors getting, that's like a byproduct of like, digital blackfaces, some might say. So like maybe you could speak to that in terms of like how that's hurting maybe the diversification of the voice acting profession, with AI being able to replicate it, but without the cultural nuances or without the actual culture.
I'll start. You're absolutely right. So a machine that just takes everything that's already out there and just jumbles it up and spits out something that's not really new is looking at all the implicit bias and institutional racism, sexism, misogyny that exists in the world and perpetuating it. So if you're looking at an algorithmic model to cast Batman, right? It's going to look at everybody who's played Batman and the numbers they made and what their current social cue is and so on and so forth, and it's going to spit out a 30 to 50-year-old white man. So again, this is why the transparency of the system is so important. Look, it's going to do a lot of cool stuff, and we want to do the cool stuff, But we have to be aware that the people that are saying cool stuff, cool stuff, cool stuff, and not preparing for the bad stuff are the people who stand to make the most money from the cool stuff and the bad stuff. So we as the public need to go open the doors, let us see it all.
Did I see a question over here? Yeah.
Yeah, you were mentioning what we can do as consumers. This is to hold people accountable. Can you go into more detail of what we can do, just every person here, when it comes to supporting y'all?
Love this question. Who wants to tackle that? Tim, I see you
That-
smiling.
That is a great question.
Tim was born for that question.
We love it.
I think part of this is a consumer rights issue. We should know what we're consuming, and the best way to support us is, actually Cissy had said this earlier. Is know that when you use our voices, or when you synthesize a voice and clone a voice, even if you're not making money off of it, or not sharing it very widely, or people are not seeing as much as you think it is. Some of these downloads have billions of downloads. Some of these sites have billions of downloads. Is that does damage to our ability to work. It does damage to our personal credibility if our voice is out there saying something that we can't do or wouldn't say. Is to understand the damage that you're doing to the people that you're fans of. And I don't know if there's anything very tangible to do except for call people out on it when you see them posting something online. Like to say, this is an amazing voice that I just created for something. And say, well, did you have the active consent of the voice actor that you did that from? Are you sharing something that they wouldn't say? Or as you said, putting a voice on SpongeBob that wouldn't fit with SpongeBob is doing damage to all those voice actors that are involved. And as much as it is fun and enjoyable to do these things, and it's creative, it also does damage to the voice actors. And it's real damage that we're seeing as it dilutes our ability to make money. It dilutes the ability of all the characters that we create out in the world. Those characters become diluted if you could just get it for free. We're not going to have more of these things that we really love to engage with. These characters we love now, these games we love, they're going to disappear if people aren't able to keep making them. And we're going to lose that as fans.
Cissy, I think you had something to add to that as well.
I did, yeah. In addition to what Tim's saying, I think a week or two ago, there was a voice actress who found that her voice was being used in a mod in a very NSFW manner. And she very politely asked that people please stop using it. And she was harassed endlessly, ended up deleting her accounts. Stand up to that. Also, at the risk of sounding like I'm standing on a soapbox, call your representatives, demand laws, because the legislation is so woefully behind the technology. Call your reps, vote for people that actually care about this stuff, because again, we don't want it all going to the billionaires, and we know they're lobbying like hell to make sure that they get what they want. Let's make sure we get what we want too.
And I think Duncan and Zeke also have something to add to that. Did you have something?
The 3 high points for us of what everyone can do is understand the approach to making this safer for the world, and that is laws. 1, contracts. 2, and transparent technology. 3.
Duncan?
Yeah, I just want to say, as a consumer, you should know that these big companies do care about what you think. Maybe not individually, but collectively. What you do as a consumer to help fight this battle is inform yourself about what the issues are, which obviously if you're hearing me say this, then you are doing that. And to be perfectly blunt about it, call BS on the companies just spin on these things. There's so much out there where the companies and their publicity teams and their strategic communications people are out there trying to convince the public that the sky is green. And it's not true. They're trying to convince the public that basic fairness issues can't be addressed because it's too expensive. It's not true. They're trying to convince people that, they've done everything that's needed to protect people from AI. Not true. They have not, and they are not willing at this moment to do what's necessary to protect not only these actors, but also the public from their implementations of AI. And so if you inform yourself and you call BS on these things, that actually is incredibly helpful because they do care about shareholder value and they do care about the bottom line, and they definitely care about consumers turning away from the things that generate revenue from them. And so you have immense power if you just inform yourself and don't let that spin confuse you.
Can I add one more thing as well, which is to that end, I think a big part of that is also speaking to peers So to get a critical mass of people that are willing to speak to companies or stand to companies also requires grassroots connections with people in your community. And so, you know, to the end of your previous question, if people are saying, well, AI is an inevitability, talk to them about that, confront them about that, ask them why they think that, present counterpoints. I mean, this really is a situation where we need to reach a critical mass of people that are informed about this, and I think that happens more effectively in one-on-one conversations with people that you actually know, versus doing it on social media.
They're in the back. I've seen your hand up for a while.
Their hand is gonna.
Okay. Sorry, you.
I'm really glad you called on me next because my question was about politics. The fact of the matter is we don't have laws about the internet yet from Congress because most of them, when the internet was being made, were like, oh, that's just a bunch of fat people in their basement. Here's about them, right? And if we don't have laws about the technology of yesterday, how are we supposed to get these guys to look at the technologies of tomorrow and to do it in a global scale? Because, you know, it's borderless. Like, if the technology is stopped here, but they make it over in, I don't know, the UK, like UK Equity isn't even allowed to support you guys, right? And they do it there, like, everybody's just gonna move over across the pond. Like, what do you do to get politicians across the globe to create something to prevent basically the arts from going away to robots?
Well, Tim, I think that's something Nava's doing right now.
This is something that's actively happening right now that Nava's working with, along with all of the global voice acting associations. And this is what we're going to see in the EU AI Act that comes out that has a lot of what we're calling for here, that people are asking for in a lot of these discussions, is going to be in that transparency. It's going to be consent. It's going to be the ability to know where your voice is being used and how it's being used. That has the protections for voice are just currently now being added as of this week. There's very specific protections for voice that aren't in the EU AI Act that we've seen that are going to be going in there, hopefully by amendment or by other proposals that are going in. That's going to trickle down to the rest of the world if it's adopted on the scale that it's hopefully going to be adopted, which is across the EU and across Europe to put these into their national laws. Same way we've seen the GDPR kind of adopted in some capacity globally. As far as the U.S. following suit, it's going to depend on if that's able to happen. But a lot of these companies who do work globally, if you work with a voice actor globally, then you're going to want to work in the laws that are going to cover you globally. And I think that hopefully we're going to see that trickle down into a very active change for the voice actors here.
They're in the back, yeah.
Hi, my name is Linsay. I'm from Temple of Geek, which is a fandom outlet. Fans, cosplayers in particular, have been really supportive of this strike and the creators that make everything. But there's been some confusion on how they can best support. This may be a tertiary question, but a lot of casual hobbyist cosplayers want to know, is it okay to just cosplay a character from a struck company? And they want to know what is the top item, bottom line, how they as fans can support the strike, because we really do.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, first of all, let me just say, really appreciate the question. There's been such an outpouring of support from fans, from the public, from the influencer and content creator community, among others, really standing up and taking a public position supporting the strike, and it is so important. And by the way, I can tell you, from having been out on picket lines every day, our members who are on those picket lines notice it, they appreciate it, it means everything to them. And so first of all, let me just start by saying thank you for that. As people know, we have a very strong rule about not promoting struck work, and that is a rule that our actors, our members are following. And the purpose of that is to make sure that every opportunity that the companies have to build revenue or to monetize these projects that have been done is shut down to the greatest extent possible. It's such a strict rule because we want the strike to be as short as possible, and anything that we do that weakens the strike or lessens that resolve tends to drag the strike out, make it last longer. We don't want that. As far as individual cosplayers go, it is okay under our rules. Our committee has said it is okay for them to do their cosplay. My suggestion to them would be, if you are supportive of the strike, figure out a way to, because I know how creative cosplayers are, because I've been here many, many times, figure out a way to combine combine your support for the strike with your favorite cosplay, because then you are actually helping us send the message we're trying to send, which is that the community at large is united, supporting us in the demands that we're making, which are reasonable demands. You've heard the actors talking about them here, and having the support of all the fandoms would be amazing. So we hope that you'll do that.
I have a pitch, and you can take it or leave it.
Make that pitch, Ashley.
I would love to see some Fran Drescher cosplay.
Yeah.
I would love to see some Adam Conover cosplay.
Yes.
So if you could find a way to, like, I don't know, like, do your magic, I would just love to see it.
The nanny had some of the best outfits I've ever seen in
I mean, come on.
And she still does, by the way.
She still does. She still does.
Yeah.
Zeke, I think Zeke has something to add to
Can I
that.
ask a follow-up question? When it comes to cosplayers, hobbyists versus influencers, a lot of influencers get invited to premieres, the big cosplay events that they put on. What should they do, whether you're a union member or not, whether you're a hobbyist or an influencer? If you get invited to a Struck Studios premiere, what do you do?
We're talking about like the Paramount Plus fandom event that's happening.
I'm talking about specifically like the premieres in Hollywood.
The premieres in
and,
Hollywood.
Yeah, there have been all kinds of invites going out.
Cosplayers will be on
Yeah.
marble red carpet.
Influencers, cosplayers, and I know because I've talked to a number of them, they've received all kinds of invitations, include some to get paid, some to have travel expenses paid, some to have custom costumes made for them for those events. And a number of people have gone public with those invites and that they are declining them. And we've been trying to say, I've actually personally recorded TikTok videos and other videos to personally thank, no, serious, to personally thank influencers and content creators who have done that for us, because it is a huge part of solidarity and of us making this strike as effective as possible for them to do that. And so many have gone public saying we've turned them down. I'm sure there will be some who accept those offers. I think it's unfortunate. We're trying to really get the message out and encourage them not to do that. We do have a rule that applies to people who aren't yet members of SAG-AFRA, which is if you were basically scab, if you do struck work that our members aren't doing, then don't expect to ever be a member of SAG-AFRA in the future. And I know some people don't care about that. Some of them, that's fine. But from our point of view, this is an existential fight that our members are engaged in, and we really need everyone's support to fight that battle.
Right here. Oh, sorry, Zeke had something. That's right.
Yeah, I just want to speak to the cosplayers. Love what you love. Do what you do. This whole thing is popular because you love the art that we create. So we can't do this without you. We do this for you. And I think it's been said here that you can do what you do and still support us. Weave it into your cosplay. We want to see the best Duncan Crabtree-Ireland which you could possibly do.
That's right.
You are creatives too, so use that creativity to the benefit of all of us.
Sorry, I saw your hand up right there.
Yeah, I had a question. If you could be maybe a little bit more specific. I've seen the thing about if you may one day be interested in joining SAG-AFRA, don't promote struck work. In relation to the con, we're here covering the con, and most of the actors aren't here. That's fine. But can you give us some specifics of things we would want to stay away from? We've been trying to be very careful, but.
So non-union actors who are going to be potentially working on struck projects, I think is what we're talking about, yeah?
Sure, I'm detecting in the question, but maybe if you don't mind, I'll try to clarify. You mean like, for example, if you're here covering this convention, and so you are in a sort of review-ish, sort of critical sort of way, covering what's happening and giving it sort of a news take on it or a review take on it.
Absolutely, but we also
Right.
have our own ambitions.
Spin on it. Yeah. Right. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is if we're talking about like news-ish type coverage or critical or review type coverage, that's not what we're viewing as promotional. But if you're talking about, going out there and, dressing in your Barbie cosplay and, just rallying for everyone to go see the Barbie movie, that would be promotional. So that's the dividing line. So we're not telling our journalist members, for example, that they can't go cover what's happening in an entertainment journalism context. That's okay. So that's the dividing line. And I will just say, if there's a specific, if you have a specific question, like there's something specific you're thinking about doing that you want to check, you can always email us at SAG-AFRA strike@sagaftra.org, and we can give you a a specific response to your unique situation.
I think did you ask? No, you haven't gone yet.
Sorry. So I've been, kind of trying to write about this for a while. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have, and you guys obviously have put a lot of creative capital, I would imagine, into how best to represent yourselves and represent this issue. Is there a particular metaphor or analogy that you've been using to help explain this to people in a way that resonates, that strikes, that, no pun intended, that, but I guess I'm interested in what that metaphor or analogy might be, whether it's specific to labor rights or AI in particular. That's my question.
I'm going to look at Tim or Zeke for this one.
I've got them.
Go for
Okay,
it.
I knew one of them would.
There's a philosophical difference between how the creators feel and how the employers feel. And it revolves around the concept of consent. There is active and there is passive consent. We, the creators, believe in active consent. You can't just do whatever you want. You can do what we tell you you can do with our name and likeness and our performance and work and what we give informed consent to do. Passive consent is I got to do everything except the singular things that you tell me I can't. And that is their approach. And we understand why they have that approach. It is because they don't want to get caught at a competitive disadvantage. But they're bargaining for a competitive disadvantage and a financial advantage. We're bargaining for our very existence. So we're not going to give passive consent. It's not like when a new technology occurs, you just get to use it until you abuse it, reclaim it, and then we fight, claw back the right. That doesn't work for us. Now, I spent 20 years in the United States Navy. I'm a retired military commander, so I'll use a military metaphor. We always talk in negotiations about, is this the hill you're willing to die on? Right? And we are at an inflection point in history right now. You can choose to fight and die on that hill, or you will be summarily executed there. That's the only choice you have.
But,
Did I see a hand up
I was going to, I'm sorry, I just want to add to
Yeah.
that, to kind of build off. It's not going to be as extreme as that. Dramatic.
We military people have a way of
Yeah, we got it. Just kind of coming back to what Ashley and Cissy had said earlier, is that what we can do, my thing is be informed. Educate yourself, because from the voice actor standpoint, we have been sending our audio files out for 20 years. We've been digitally sending our audio around the world for years. It's very easy to have been picked up and to be used. And we need to look and make sure we're educated now to put those contracts into place. If you don't have them, NAVA has supplied an AI writer for our people to download, our members to download, or anybody to download, and put in their contracts to start protecting yourself now, because what we don't want to have happen is for your first job to be your last job. And that's very likely that's going to happen.
Right there, yeah.
A bit left of centre. A lot of what's being talked about is talked about in the context of kind of negotiating a new technology versus an income for living actors. Has there been any conversation around handling iconic deceased actors' voices? What protections exist? And I think, like we saw in Star Wars, they kind of went near that with Carrie Fisher. But someone like Kevin Conroy, who spent 30 years of his life voicing Batman, what protections currently exist? And is there any discussion about introducing protections for actors who have created libraries of voices over decades, passed away? And I mean, where does ownership reside? What is the organisation doing to not preserve, but to protect that from being abused? Because in a sense, you're not just talking about losing jobs to entirely artificial voices generated from certain sources. You're potentially also talking about losing jobs to AIs which have produced voices from libraries of deceased actors' voices that are culturally iconic.
I love a lot of actors, but I don't want to watch them forever. The right of publicity is not a federally standard right. It is dictated by the states, and so it's different everywhere. And employers would contend that once you die, the right of publicity becomes fair use. How would you guys feel for your kids if once you die, a company can come along and profit off of your likeness in any way that they want without the consent of your family? Now, there are states like New York and California where that is protected and moves down to the estate, the heirs, but that's not the same everywhere. So when we talk about, legislation, contractual protection, and understanding the technology, one of the legislative pieces there is a federal IP right in name and likeness. And so that's another thing that everyone can do to help. I mean, you vote with your vote, you vote with your dollars, you vote with your eyeballs. Our politicians, in theory, work for us. And so to get them to pass something like a federal IP right in name and likeness that is a transferable right that then protects the deceased's family from having their ancestors abused is very important.
Oh, sorry, before we go on to that, I think the other thing to directly to your point is, to the extent that those projects were done under union contracts, it is a mandatory subject of bargaining under federal labor law that those employers negotiate for anything like that type of use with the union. And so that is one of the reasons why AI is such a existential issue in the negotiations, not only film and television and streaming, but interactive and everywhere else, because what we're negotiating for now not only protects today into the future, but it also governs what kind of use will be made of things from history as well. And so this is our chance to make sure that the sort of nightmare scenario that you just described doesn't come to pass. And so between a combination of public policy, like you just described, and collective bargaining, those are how we can address it. But I will point out, this is one of the reasons why, regardless of whether you're a member of the union, it is so essential to be working under union contracts, because that same protection doesn't apply to people who worked at non-union work where they signed their own individual contracts. And so in that case, unless they had the foresight to think 30 years down the road and imagine artificial intelligence coming to pass, they may not have put protective provisions into those contracts. So this is a real, very serious existential concern on the part of our members.
Well, and I think one thing to add to that, which is why you mentioned collective bargaining, is that if you are not doing this under a union contract, the onus is on you to find a lawyer you can afford to take on XYZ studio who has endless pockets of money to fight you on it.
Right, and who knows what they're doing.
Exactly. Yeah, I saw it.
So, Duncan and Cissy, totally get it. When it comes to voiceovers and protecting voiceover actors, you want to make sure things are solid with these companies so there isn't a duplication of, an actor's voice being used in a rival game or promotion. However, in regards to the fan mods, some of this has to do with piracy. A lot of this has to do with piracy. How are you going to combat it?
Well, I think that's why Zeke was referencing right publicity. I mean, this issue in general, the AI issue, has to be addressed through a combination of things. Has to be addressed through collective bargaining, has to be addressed through public policy, has to be addressed through education of the public and fans as well, so that everybody is on the same page about what is an appropriate set of boundaries around the implementation of AI. And so that's how we're going to address that. And again, I think that we can find a path. I think there is a path to be found that allows for appropriate levels of that type of engagement, while taking Cissy's, I think, very well stated concerns about how that can be misused into account. Same thing. I mean, this is something that goes across all areas of actors. I mean, one of the areas where this has been at the forefront has been in deepfakes and the abuse of many of our more high-profile members in just egregious ways by people using deepfake technology. I won't even go into a description of them, but I think you all know what I mean. And there needs to be public policy boundaries set around this that can really constrain it. And I think there will be.
I mean, there was a question earlier about why politicians are going to care now. That's why.
Yeah.
Because there's the ease with which they can be deep faked coming up on a very important election. Yeah. They care.
Right here.
Yeah, my name is Preston. I'm also a voice actor too. Do you think that part of the reason why that people have been so open to try to use these technologies in abusive ways has been because of social stigma behind the profession of the voice actor itself? Because most people don't quite know exactly what we do, right, and how we do it to some extent. So.
That's part of the reason why NAVI exists. That's why we are very specifically advocating on behalf of voice actors to get out from behind the mic from what it is that we do as a profession, and it's not what necessarily people think it is. A lot of people a lot of people work from home. Most people work from home, and they have for decades, for 20 years. So the pandemic hit, and most voice actors, nothing changed for us because we were already working at home by ourselves. We've already been isolated for a decade ourselves, just for our work that we do. I think the part of this, going back to kind of what was being said over here, is the voice acting industry itself is approximately 80% non-union, and so we have to look beyond even just what these union contracts are, of trying to get more voice actors covered under these union contracts. But for those who aren't in that position to be able to do that, we have to find something that's going to help protect them, which is public policy legislation.
And education.
Education. Really, the best thing that we've been able to do is to educate the voice actor. We've been working from the inside out. We educate the voice actor to pass it along to the production companies they work with, who pass it along to then the other companies they work with, and pass that to the fans, and they start to hear more of this policy change happening that way. And from my experience, what we've seen is that the companies we work with are very much supportive of putting framework in place for this. They want these controls. They want to have some ability to protect their work as well. He's talking about IP being taken and used without their approval. Trying to find some protections for that. So we've worked from the inside out to try and help shed some light on what voice actors do and what the reality of voice acting is.
Well, I think and maybe we expand on that a little bit, is, we're really talking about the blue collar worker, right? Celebrities are gonna make their millions of dollars, but I think there's also a misnomer as to well, how much did you get paid for that animated series or that video game? Where's your residuals?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of voice actors will work a 9 to 5, come home and do, work on their audiobooks and their auditions at night, and they're working on weekends. They're working, and then those are the ones who are making their living to try and become a full-time voice actor. And even if you become a full-time voice actor, most of your time is spent unemployed. You wake up every day unemployed and trying to know if you're going to get work in there. Possibility.
This is why I was saying earlier, you don't get into voiceover to be rich. So again, we do this because we love it with our souls.
And actually, Karen Guilford, our NAMA vice president, has her hand raised to add to this.
Voice acting is not just TV and films and animation and video games. It's also e-training and phone systems and explainer videos and all of the, when you call a hotline, it's a voice actor's voice that is talking to you. It's all of that work that's very easily taken over by AI.
The entry level stuff that Ashley was talking about, right? Or the middle America blue collar work that also has an existential threat facing it right now.
I'll get to you right there, but Zeke, I think, has something to add.
So in direct response to your question, right now, the current maturation of the technology makes it easier to replace just a voice than a full actor. Also, in voice actors, the lack of celebrity, the fact that we are not always recognizable faces, makes it easier to replace them. I always hate the slippery slope argument, but it's relevant here because the companies have actually come out and said that they intend to do it to all actors. So it's, that's where it starts to get scary. This just happens to be the easiest right now, so they're picking it off. Again, this goes back to the active versus passive consent argument. And we haven't really talked to this yet. If you kill the entry-level performer, right, we have to understand that performers don't happen overnight. A lot of people think you just decide one day you want to be an actor and then you're an actor. It takes a lot of time. It takes constant work, it takes constant training, just like any other profession, to be really good at it. And when you cut off the places where people learn and grow, by the time you realize there are no actors, you now need decades to build actors back. So we need to all protect ourselves from getting to a point where we're just watching derivative robot-produced garbage, and then we have to dig back down to find out how to make performers.
I saw it right here, yeah.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for being here. My name's Duncan Crabtree-Ireland. I'm from Nerd News Social. You guys mentioned that you appreciate what AI can do, but you guys want to just work with it and be treated fairly from it. But we've come to the point where scripts are being made by AI, and extras want to be scanned and be owned forever, pretty much with one scan, and with the help of the AI, just be put in everything and be owned for nothing, pretty much. Do you think that there'll ever be a time where you can fully work with AI and come to an agreement with it? Because it sounds like they do want to get rid of pretty much actors and just pay them one time and just be done.
If I may, like I said earlier, I am working with a company that has the actor first ethical approach to AI in mind. That is our point. They came to me and said, because I started working with Tim and Zeke at NAVA to build a framework that is publicly available at navavoices.org/synth-AI. And you can see all of our bullet points for what we need to exist in an ethical way with AI going forward. They came to me and said, we will build a company like this. Can you help us? And I said, you're lying. And they said, no, really. So we are actively working on that with constantly getting input from other actors to make sure that we include all of the potential caveats. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, but again, we cannot be anti-technology in a world that values technology, right? We have to find a way to work with it ethically that benefits everybody, that does not leave us out to dry with our voices stolen regardless.
And
right?
I think
If we do nothing, they'll be stolen anyway. So we have to get protections in place via the union, via federal regulation, and via companies that are willing to see humanity and give a crap about humanity, right? That's
Okay, and Ashley, from the writer's perspective, is there an ethical way to use like ChatGPT?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a tool like anything else. As you say, I mean, I think Duncan mentioned before, vocal stress is a big thing with interactive performers. If there was a way to use AI so that voice actors didn't have to scream, to do death sounds, that would be wonderful. If there was a way to do it that protected, the instruments of performers, or as writers are concerned, it's a good research tool, or it's a good, if you're stuck trying to come up with a character name, there are things like that ChatGPT is great for. And it's unreasonable to think, like Cissy is saying, that asking anyone to just stop using a form of technology that could be beneficial, it's not what any of us are asking for. But this is an inflection point. It's a moment where we could either make sure those protections are in place for the humans that are behind these creative works, or our likenesses and our work and our art will get taken. So I think what you're sort of speaking to is kind of, the catastrophic version of it. And that's exactly why we're here right now, is to prevent that from happening.
And we cannot accept this idea that just because it's out there, we can't ever put any constraints on it, or that, it's not implementing itself. People are implementing it. Companies, corporations, and the people that they employ to do it are implementing it. So there is no reason that we can't have some common sense guidelines around it. There's no reason that because the technology of cars exists, that you can't have a driver's license. That is the problem, is that these big companies want us to buy into this idea. It can't be controlled. It's just out there. It's just going to do whatever it does. Maybe Skynet will come to be, and maybe that will someday be true. But today, the truth is, in this industry, a handful of huge mega corporations are going to make decisions about how this is implemented. It's going to be decisions and choices made by their executives and people. And those executives and people can make good choices, or they can make bad choices. And we want them to make good choices. And we think you and we and all of us together can convince them to make good choices.
And to add one more thing to that, and I think we've touched on it as well, but this is not just a concern just for the entertainment industry. This is something that is going to affect workers. So if you are a worker, then this is an issue. So I think that's also a really good reason to, exactly what Duncan said, to not see this as an inevitability. I think having unions and being part of a union is a massive, massive boon right now. Essential, I would say, to protect against this kind of technology, and to believe that with collective bargaining you can make protections that ensure that your livelihood is not replaced.
Zeke, you had something to add?
100%. You are all journalists. You write things. Do you want to use ChatGPT as a tool to help you write things, or do you want your boss to just use it instead of you? I think I know what you said.
I saw a hand back here.
We're right there. Yeah.
Thank you. My question was, what is the importance of SAG and its president being here at Comic-Con during the strike, and how is SAG using the convention as a platform?
Well, we're all here, aren't we?
Yeah, I should first of all say our president, Fran Drescher, is not here at Comic-Con this weekend. I know she would love to be. She's not able to be here this weekend. I'm not the president of SAG-AFRA. I'm the national executive director, so I'm her counterpart as a staff person sort of equivalent of like a CEO of a company. I'm here to help deliver that message. But in our case, in the union's case, the union is about the members. So all of these people who are here, actors, and all the other types of entertainment industry and media industry workers who are part of SAG-AFRA, that's what SAG-AFRA is there for. That's why our logo is a person and not some like random, symbol of some kind. And so what we're doing here is really to help deliver the message that all of these voice actors are delivering, which is that there needs to be fair treatment that involves, in particular as it relates to AI, informed consent. It involves making sure that there's fair compensation and that there are guardrails around the abusive use of other types of AI technology. So that's the message that we're delivering here at Comic-Con, and we're also delivering the message of appreciation for all of the fans and everyone else who has stood by us in this strike and understand that we're not, that the ban on promotional activities, while I know it can be frustrating to a lot of people, it's there for a really good reason, and it's helping us win a battle that is crucial and existential for our members.
Right there, yeah.
Hi, I'm from Dallas, where one of the larger companies exists, and I have a friend that's in voice acting, and a cursory glance at what he was offered was unfair. And I tried to have that conversation with him recently, and it was more, it boiled down to, you don't understand what it's like to be a starving actor. You're a journalist. Stay in your lane. To which I had a response I would not share. But what would you say to somebody that is struggling to get in, and then all of a sudden there is an opportunity presented in front of them, and they are in that position?
Well, I think, Tim, you said, do you want your first job to be your last
Yeah,
job?
you want your first job to be your last job.
I said that to him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I
exactly.
said, this is going to be it, and you'll never have anything else.
And then that's very, very, very likely. This industry is not an easy industry to get into. There is a struggle. It is very, very hard. I started in '96 in voiceover, and it wasn't until 2016 that I started to make a living at this. That's my own personal failure in having made it.
When we came into this contract negotiation, we knew we had to present specific proposals, because the thing about AI is the devil's in the details. And if we just came in with general principles, that was not going to be adequate protection for our members over the course of even the next 3 years, much less beyond. So, so we do have very specific proposals, but there's several parts that I think can address that. Number one, of course, is the fact that throughout our proposals, there's a theme of fair compensation for the use of AI tools. And in the case of actors, that may be a digital replica. In the case of a driver, that may be with respect to self-driving technology or whatever, making sure that the human element of that is fairly compensated, notwithstanding the use of the technology. Another part is the issue of training AI systems. So I don't know anything about the UPS negotiations, but I would suspect that one of the things that companies like that will want to do is actually use the work of their workers, in this case drivers, to help train their self-driving systems, right? And to the extent they want to do that, that needs to be negotiated with the union. It needs to be dealt with in a fair manner in terms of compensation, and make sure that it's implemented in a human way. So those are just a couple of the principles that are built into our proposals that I think could help IATSE, can help the Teamsters in the Hollywood negotiations next year to really to drive that home. And the last thing I'll just say, I'm sure others want to say stuff too about this, is the principles that we're fighting for, like that is going to help, because to the extent that we have a deal that addresses AI, that the Writers Guild has a deal that addresses AI, that sets the groundwork. And so when IATSE and the Teamsters start their bargaining, it's not going to be starting from zero, which is where we had to start from. It's going to be starting from, okay, the industry has agreed AI has to be addressed. Now the only question is exactly what way that's going to be addressed. So I think there's a lot to benefit that negotiation that can come out of what we're doing now.
Zeke, did you want
No, I don't think I need to restate what I just said very articulately. So.
Yes, thank you.
What do you guys suggest that fans can do to support the strike?
I think we touched on that a little, but
I'll say it again.
Yeah.
When you're cosplaying,
Personal ideas.
throw something in there. Have the SAG-AFRA strong pin, or the sash, or I support the WGA.
I made ribbons. Do you want one?
but I think one thing we can touch on is
I'm jazz playing tomorrow. Can I steal one?
Yes. I only have 2 left.
Oh no!
I mean, that's great. Seize my hand.
Find me. I'm Emma Frost tomorrow, and I will give you something.
Okay.
Yes.
Come to my panel.
So I will say, the issue of modding and Nexus Mod, what came up earlier, one of the reasons we as voice actors became aware of that was because a member of the modding community went public on Twitter and said, hey voice actors, this is happening to you, and he put out a public statement on Twitter saying, hey, if you're part of the modding community, don't do this. So I think that's, and I'm sure other people have examples, but that's one example is we had the community itself coming out and supporting us.
We also, I became aware of my voice on several sites like 18 months ago or something like that. And I panicked because people weren't talking about it yet. I didn't know what to do. So I started working with Tim and Zeke and we created the group that made the framework. But we then reached out to those companies and said, please remove my voice. You do not have my consent to have my voice. And then our fans started telling other fans, hey, Cissy said she didn't give her consent to use her voice on this platform. You guys, please don't use it. And that's been really effective. So if you do see someone's voice being used and you either know that they don't consent or maybe they don't know, let them know. And if you know they don't consent, just say, hey, that's not cool. Any little bit of support is really helpful because right now it's like whack-a-mole. So any help is greatly appreciated.
And that's the only way that we currently, going back to your tracing question, that's the only way that we are able to stay informed that anything is happening. And we have, we've sat down, Carter and I first sat down with with CEOs from these companies and asked them respectfully to take down some of these sites, some of their files. We've had multiple thousands of files removed in the last 6 months, and all of these companies we've spoken with have said, if you send us a takedown request, if the voice actor sends us a takedown request, we will remove those audio files. Same thing with some of the modding sites. We are actively working with them to find ethical ways for the mod authors to be able to continue to do what they do and what they love to do and what helps promote all of the things that we love to be a part of as well. So the companies, it's not an us against them, it's almost all of us against the legal framework that exists and people working within the laws, because a lot of what they're doing in a lot of ways is in line with what they're allowed to do. And so we're trying to find ways to work with them ethically to make that change. They are very respectfully taking down these files, but that has to come from either the video game company or from the specific voice actor. So every single voice actor, if there's 3,000 files on there and they're different voice actors, 3,000 voice actors have to go onto these sites, submit a request to have their file removed, and then have that taken down. And a lot of voice actors, we don't have the time. We don't have the time to scour. It would be a full-time job sitting on the internet trying to make sure my audio files aren't somewhere out there, right?
Or are deceased.
Or somebody,
right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
This is also a basic thing, but as Duncan said before, there is going to be a rash of public attempts to convince that everyone that the sky is green, right? There's going to be rhetoric from people that are across the table from us that are going to try to paint striking union members as asking for too much, as overreaching. I mean, it's already happened. And so I think a big thing for people that are fans of the work that we do is to believe us that we are asking for things. We are not asking for the moon, that we are asking for protections and for compensation that our members need, and to stay informed in that regard, and not just, if you hear something salacious, to look into it and to speak to each other about those issues, because again, I think it's very easy to see something on social media and absorb it as if it's fact, or for other people to regurgitate things without checking on them. So speaking within your community of other fans and making sure that you guys are informed on what's really happening is a huge thing.
And I think Duncan mentioned it earlier. There is an email address. If you see information and you want to verify if it's true or not, email SAG-AFRA@SAG-AFRA.org.
And Zeke, you had something to add?
The fans can know who to blame. Strikes hurt people. They hurt the performers. They hurt all the industries that are adjacent on film sets. There are caterers, there are drivers, there are grips and gaffers. All of these people are now out of work and hurting. It hurts those people's families. It even hurts the consumer, and that the things that you enjoy, if this happened in the middle of COVID and everybody is sheltering at home and finding hope through the art that's delivered to them, that art won't be there. And we are going to be painted as the people who are to blame for that. It's the labor force's fault that everyone's out of work.
Not the
But
CEO making.
in order for us, if that was the case, in order for us to fix this, we would have to accept an existential threat to our careers. In order for them to fix it, they just have to pay some money. I think they have money. I think.
$2 million.
Yeah.
So that we know who's to blame.
Right there, yeah.
This is less a question than just a general note to your thing. One of the things, social media can be a raggedy place.
Say it again.
Yes, and Twitter, which I have been on for 14 years, is top of the list. But one thing that I've been heartened to see is like a deadline, and not to shade if you deadline, I'm sorry, but if you're but like they posted this video of Matt Damon at the Oppenheimer premiere, which they conveniently moved up an hour so that they could walk the carpet before the strike. But he was talking about like the reasons why SAG was going on strike, and like when Deadline tweeted the video, they used like the beginning part of the quote, which made it look like he was saying, oh, the strike is going to hurt everybody and it's bad, where if you continued the video, he was talking about, but we need to protect our workers, and I was very heartened to see a lot of people on Twitter and a lot of fans calling them out for doing stuff like that. So I think it's important, particularly as journalists, to be able to paint like the full picture and to not just go for like the clickbaity thing, or if you're a fan and really calling that out. Because I felt like that was really great to see people reacting to that. And I've seen it several times where it's like articles are painted in a certain way, the fans will come out and be in support. So I think that's something to know.
Right here.
Thank you. Going back to what Ashley was saying about grassroots conversations one-on-one with people and digging into something salacious you see online, what are the best sources you can go to or send people to in conversation and reference to learn about labor and what the reasonable asks are so that you're not confused?
SAG-AFRA is one. NavaVoices.org. WGA, yeah, absolutely.
And if you don't know who Adam Conover is, he is.
Everybody hates that.
Follow him, watch his TikToks. He explains just the idea of collective bargaining and striking in a very succinct, very easily digestible ways. So he's also a great resource.
Yeah, here.
Apologies if this is redundant, but what, if any, support might you be receiving from the recording industry? Because it also sounds like a lot of these arguments harken back to when music first started to be more digitized and people no longer had to buy full albums on a CD. All of a sudden, you had things that were streaming without people's consent. You had sound bites being used without artist recognition. So are you receiving any support in those terms for protecting your art as well?
Tim, do you want to talk about the Human Artistry Campaign?
Yeah,
and some
well,
other
this is probably
Or
the
Duncan,
SAG-AFRA is part of the Human Artistry Campaign, which is all art associations, unions have joined forces to promote the human art that is out there. I come from music. I'm from Seattle. I grew up in the 90s. I was playing around Seattle in the 90s. When this happened, as a consumer, I took in that music. I took in all of that. I was on Napster. I was on all of those sites, and very quickly realized how damaging that was. Not quickly enough because the damage had already been done. But hopefully, at that point, we gave the tech companies the okay to just go ahead and do this. We saw it as a phenomenal thing, and I saw it as a phenomenal thing. It was amazing. I currently now to work as a professional musician, I've seen my entire industry just disappear. The working class musician who could have a weekly job, a daily job as a musician does not exist. Does not exist. And that's where we're headed right now if we don't have some way to realize that what is happening now, we saw it 20 years ago. We're seeing it again.
I would just add, the Human Artistry Campaign is fantastic, and one of the things that's great about it is that the industry itself, the labels are part of that campaign. Regrettably, the studios and streamers are not yet part of that campaign in an organized way. So hopefully they'll get there, and I think it is more powerful when all parts of the industry are working together on a public policy campaign like that. I would just also note the Human Artistry Campaign is really focused on issues of sort of intellectual property rights, and that is a huge and important part of this, but it is not the totality of it. And I think For example, when we start talking about how artists will be properly compensated and things like that, that's an additional element that goes beyond that. But we haven't really talked about copyright in this panel, and that's fine, but I would just note, one of the things that is really good that's happened on the public policy level is the U.S. Copyright Office has taken a very strong position on the non-copyrightability of AI-created content. Their position is that under the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, and also under the Copyright Act, that human authorship is required for something to be eligible for copyright registration. And that is really essential because that helps ensure that these big companies have an incentive to pursue human creativity, and we want them to have that incentive. That is not the position that is being taken everywhere around the world, and that's another place where global advocacy is really important, where the public can also have a huge impact. There are certain countries in Europe, for example, where the trend is developing in the opposite direction, where they are prepared to consider AI as a source of copyrightable work, and we really want to try and move that in the other direction in the interest of human artistry.
And that was talked on, in the Senate testimony last week. I believe it was Warner Brothers executive called for a federal national right of publicity, federal right of publicity.
I saw a hand in the back there, yeah. Unionizing the devs, came and met with SAG. We had several meetings at the SAG building with the Game Workers United folks to talk about, because we'd come out of the strike, the video game strike, and we had very good conversations with them on what are things you can do?
I wanted to say, that I believe across the board there's a huge amount of solidarity in the interactive space, voice acting interactive space with game developers. We love developers, and we, I'll just speak for myself personally, I've been wanting devs to unionize forever. And I will say as well that I would consider SAG an open resource for, as Zeke was saying, communication, solidarity, leadership. I mean, I connected some WGA people with some SAG people to just sort of, this is not, we are all sort of in the same soup together. And I know voice actors adore and respect all the work that developers do. And I will also say, I think it can feel really intimidating. We're lucky in that SAG has existed for a long time and we just got to join. What you're trying to do is harder, but it starts in very, very small sections. So it really is grassroots, and it sounds maybe too basic or maybe like it wouldn't move fast enough, but it really is those one-on-one conversations, because one-on-one becomes 2 people talking, becomes 3 people talking, becomes a group, becomes a union. So it really is about talking to people individually and uniting in that way, and knowing that you have support from other established unions that you can always call on. I don't want to speak for the entire interactive community, but I will, in fact. We're here. And we want you to have the protections that you deserve and have deserved for a very long time.
So there is a human at the back of the room named Sarah Amale who has poured her heart and soul into Game Workers United. She's a great resource.
I am one of those actors who has loved game developers and involved myself and learned about game development. I've gone to GDC since 2011. We are part of development, and we are all creatives and workers. We are labor activists, either about to be or currently fighting a very difficult fight. But I have always seen our cause is shared, and our leverage is shared, and our information is something that should be shared, and our support that should be shared. I'm not just saying this, from the start of my career as a voice actor, I have come to developers to learn how they work, to embrace, how to collaborate with them. So this goes back, but this is, again, to the same point, we're with you, and thank you for any support you share with us.
Yeah.
And use the technology that's available. You'd be amazed at what 2 people with an idea and a website can do.
Yes.
So get out there and do it.
And go ahead.
Have hope. Do you know who Chris Smalls is?
Yes.
Yeah. So I met Chris Smalls at the LA Federation of Labor. And for those of you that don't know, this was a young man who was an Amazon worker who stood tall by himself, linked arm in arm with his fellow employees, and started a union at Amazon.
Woo! He's so incredible.
He is incredible. Mm-hmm. But this is the beginning of a union, which is what you're talking about. So those people like Sarah, like Chris, are out there as resources and making themselves available. Because the more other industries they bring into their fight, the stronger it bolsters their position. So use them.
Yeah, I just want to say, well, first of all, definitely, we stand in support, and SAG-AFRA will do whatever we can to help. But I want to just also, as a word of encouragement, note, not that long ago, just maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, the actors who work in Spanish language telenovelas for Telemundo in Miami came to us, and they wanted to be represented. They wanted to have a union because they felt like they weren't being treated fairly. And we went in and working with them together, we organized the first new television network to be organized in over 50 years. And we spent 16 months negotiating a first contract with them. And now all the telenovela actors working in Spanish language on Telemundo in Miami are covered by SAG-AFRA contracts, and there's 100 families covered by health insurance that wouldn't have been covered otherwise. There's more than that, families who have retirement plans that didn't have anything before that, and by the way, they also get residuals. So now that they never got before. And so, it seems so daunting, but it is 100% doable as long as you have unity, you have people who are willing to stand up like Chris Smalls and just be courageous, because the union is you, the union is our members. The union isn't me, it's not the staff, it's the members who make it. And the last thing I wanted to say is, there has been an intentionally created narrative by big business in this country since the 1970s to try and make unions seem like a bad thing. I grew up in the South. My parents didn't happen to be in unions or anything like that.